Hello, guys and gals, me Mutahar, and ladies and gentlemen, we've got a wild thing to talk about today. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this group called Scientology. I'm sure that a lot of you guys watching, and whoever is interested in true crime, whoever's interested in things like cults, probably knows what Scientology kind of is. For anybody that's completely new and out of the loop, Scientology is in fact a religion started by a science fiction writer called L. Ron Hubbard quite a while back. And this religion, which, a lot of celebrities like Tom Cruise, John Travolta, a lot of these people are a part of, is very controversial. A religion that, a lot of people, if you really get down to the brass tacks of it, is just, it's weird. It really is just a weird religion. And it's one of those things that's super popular in places like Los Angeles, places like Florida. And of course, understandably, I think a lot of people have been targeted by the church over the last several decades. And it's just one of these things where when you really start talking about the story, it is a confusing mess. But why are we talking about Scientology today? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have had my own little brushes with Scientology. I've actually been to some of these places in Los Angeles, but I never had the balls to do what some children are actually doing nowadays. So to give you an idea, there's been this trend called #Scientology speedrun. So a bunch of kids in Los Angeles are deciding to raid this particular building, the L. Ron Hubbard building. It's actually right on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and Sunset. So let's watch one of these raid videos first and get an idea of what's actually going on. So basically, in these clips, a lot of these children have been running inside these Scientology buildings, and the Scientologists have been stopping them. So here you can see they go in with the air horns. It's a whole bunch of kids. They run into the buildings, basically go down all of these hallways everywhere they can. Now, of course, understandably, this is trespassing, so I'm not actually endorsing it. I don't think that that's cool. But these kids have decided to run through a place that I've only ever seen the lobby of. I actually went into this building, just the lobby. And these kids are deciding to go back in or out. The actual Scientologists are trying to push them out of it. It's fucking crazy. Now, again, I've been in this building once, right? I actually had the privilege of talking to somebody at the reception. I believe her name was Twilla. And I talked to her. I remember my wife was with me and she was enamored by it, right? She did not go into the building. I decided to walk in. I had a chat and she tried to get me to go into the back and watch a video, which I did not. I actually was able to get out because thankfully, a bunch of children who didn't rush in were just screaming how Scientology was a cult at the time. So I got out of it, didn't go in and watch the video, but I have a different actual story about that too, okay? But anyways, this was one of those videos. Now, this trend immediately started becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's actually more of these videos out there. In fact, people have been doing this trend so much that in this case, the Scientology buildings have decided to actually lock their buildings off, okay? They've barred entry because so many kids are doing this now, trying to get into the Scientology building. In fact, in some cases, they'll just pry open the door like this, send in the entire team, and just start fucking raiding the place. I mean, it's actually insane to see, man. I mean, this is the wildest shit. So they're actually running down the straight entry. They're grabbing the books. This is where I would have been sent to watch the tape, I imagine. But yeah, they're just getting kicked out immediately. It is, what people were often afraid to do back in the day, a bunch of these Zoomer kids on TikTok are just doing it for the fucking memes. I mean, it's crazy to a point. People are dressing up like Jesus Christ, for crying out loud, raiding the thing. I mean, there's really not much you can do when 20, 30 kids have decided to run through the entire building. I mean, it is insane. And here, They actually went to the second floor, and yeah, that was Sonic running through the entire thing as well. So you can see they're being chased by the actual staff. This is something that I would never have expected to see, and now kids are just doing it. It's one of those trends where I can't endorse, but at the same time, Scientology is such a controversial, such an interesting religion that it's hard for me to even sympathize with them. Now, there's been so many runs that something that I found really interesting here, I'm not even joking, is people have started to map this shit out. So when you play games like Metroid back in the day, and they didn't come with a map screen, and you had to draw the map of of the fucking planet and shit just as you were playing it. Yeah, well, there have been so many like raids that people have started to like map out, for instance, the actual floor plan to the Scientology building. So literally from the actual like lobby, you can run down this hallway. You can see elevators. I guess you could say like a common area, what appears to be this classroom, and of course the question marks or the areas that are unexplored. Okay, like it's like a video game. They're filling up the map as they fucking go. So only 2 floors have been breached in the Scientology speedruns. And ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, that's pretty much what it kind of comes down to. Now, there's obviously more videos that are coming day by day. This is one of those trends that I thought was going to last for like a day. And Scientology was actually pretty quiet about this until they made like an actual statement about this a day ago. Like it's crazy. So the Church of Scientology tells the LA Times that this speed running like situation, the speed running community that's targeting the Scientology building is, they're participating in trespassing, harassment, and disruption of religious facilities. Over recent weeks, individuals have repeatedly forced their way into church properties on Hollywood Boulevard, disrupted religious and public facilities, damaged the property, and endangered staff, parishioners, and visitors. Turning its space into targets for viral stunts is not journalism, protest, or civic activities. And there have been like people that are critics of the church, like Leah Remini, who's probably been one of the most like publicly outspoken. She used to be like a member. She was on TV, like she was a celebrity in Los Angeles, still is. But she was somebody that, she's not somebody that necessarily agrees with this because, to a lot of people, they'll look at this and think you're just giving the Scientologists like a win by like harassing them and sort of like trespassing in their buildings, right? And some people just feel that it's warranted because Scientology has such a stink and controversy around it, which we'll kind of dig into it as well. It's not undeserved whatsoever. But yeah, anyways, the cops are involved. The LAPD is monitoring this. And apparently even the church officials are now accused this of being like a hate crime. Like, get the fuck out of here, dude. A hate crime? Come on now. Now, ultimately, the end of this, one of the things that obviously I want to talk about is beyond just these videos, like this trend isn't really wild on its own, simply because it's just Scientology. But my experience with Scientology is actually a little bit less intensive than what these teens have been doing. I remember like my first time ever going to like a Scientology building was one of their celebrity centers in Los Angeles. I remember I was telling like Jen at the time, like we should probably just fucking check it out. Like we're in like, it's a big thing in Los Angeles. So I was like, all right, let's go check it out. So we go to their celebrity center and they actually allowed the public to come in. Now, I feel like using Google Earth is probably the best way to describe the story, simply so I can show you exactly the pathway to madness. Now, we basically parked our vehicle somewhere around like this area, obviously a few blocks away. I didn't want to actually park the vehicle inside their parking lot, so we actually walked up all the way over here where a guard actually met us. He had basically held us over here for like probably 5 minutes to basically radio in with somebody from the actual church to come over here and meet us. So we waited like 5, maybe like 10 minutes at the most. But anyways, basically somebody came down over here. We walked down this parking lot until we had reached this section where there was this like cafe that you're seeing over here, where I swear it felt as if like people were just sort of placed there for us to see if people were just having like a drink or two, because the actual cafe was closed, but sitting outside were like 2 people sipping coffee. So I always found that to be weird. But then we ended up walking inside, I believe here, to which like, if you navigate inside the building, we were probably sitting at this section. And over here, like you just meet like these church individuals that start playing a video. And we made it like 10 minutes through the video until like Jen was like, we should get the fuck out of here, because as you're watching the video, what she had noticed, though, is like somebody was just like looking at us over and over and just like typing things into a computer. So at that point, we just got up, and they're very like, they definitely want you to stay. They try to talk you into staying. So you have to basically say no a bunch of times and try to leave until you are effectively allowed to leave out of the area. To which point we got out of here, we walked the fuck out as quick as we could, found our vehicle, and effectively just left. That was my big experience at one of these Scientology celebrity centers, which they're open to the public. It's just a very weird way that they're open to the public. It's not like a traditional church or a mosque or a synagogue or any religious building where I think anybody is really just kind of allowed to walk in as long as they're respectful. Now, ultimately, because of these like entire speed runs, there's like two camps of individuals that, think this is either good or bad. So again, like I said, Leah Remini thinks that this is counterproductive. So she's somebody that wants people to, be talking about the dangers and criminality of Scientology, but ultimately harassment like this doesn't really help out. Versus somebody like Jenna Hill, who is literally the niece of David Miscavige, going and saying, what these kids are kind of doing is trolling Scientology, getting these viral views, and it's literally just making Scientology as an institution actually uncomfortable, right? And she actually appreciates that kind of stuff. So there's a debate, amongst the ex-Scientologists and the people that want this cult to have more scrutiny. They're debating if this is good or bad. Now, the big response from Scientology over here has also been for the people participating in this run. They actually are worried about like reprisals from the church. So in one of the people that was involved in the most recent speed runs, they spoke to the Times and they wanted to be anonymous because they were worried that if the church and the LAPD were going to go after them because of this kind of stuff too. And it isn't uncommon for the church, or at least, for the organization to think of, being litigious towards some of their biggest critics and some of the people opening light on this. Again, this is why Scientology is like one of these like controversial religions, because again, when you look into the Scientology and you go beyond the South Park stuff where they showed the beliefs of Scientology, about like Xenu and the whole Thetans coming to planet Earth, Xenu escaping from galactic prison, throwing like a whole bunch of like souls into Earth's volcanoes and all that shit, and those like souls like infesting it. It's truly a wild religion, and I don't really like to get into the specifics of it because you can talk to a Scientologist and they'll tell you, hey, you believe in a different sort of sky god, so who are you to say if you're right? And the reality of it is we could argue about the theology back and forth, but it's really how the church conducts itself, by being so, I guess you could say, by being so offensive to some of its critics, and also at the same time the focus of money is something that, while other religions do have things like tithes and donations, it seems like for Scientology it's very important that the church centralizes and gathers as much money as they can from the people that are their most like loyal parishioners. Now, what was really interesting about this building that I wanted to talk about too, that was really, really important, was the fact that the building these kids were sort of rushing into contains what is the most controversial wing of Scientology, is the OSA. Now, like System Shock 2, the OSA in reality land is the Office of Special Affairs. Now, what the fuck the Office of Special Affairs does is where things start to get really, really wild. So the OSA, when it comes to Scientology, is basically compared to as an intelligence agency. So some people compare it to things like the CIA or the KGB. And of course, the department's job is at this point to target critics of the church with things like dead agent operations or character assassination, right? So if you're somebody that's outspoken, let's say you're like a former celebrity, these people will do everything they allegedly can to ruin your fucking life. Publicly, it's for legal affairs and the public relations, but obviously a lot of people have focused on things like Scientology targeting you for being critical of it. So this is a 26-year-old article from The Guardian, and they talk about how, the Church of Scientology agrees to pay things like libel damages to former members of the church for waging what they consider to be a hate campaign against them. So the controversial church, which was founded in the 50s, so again, by a late science fiction writer called L. Ron Hubbard, who literally is an individual that, has a lot of connections to things that people find very, very controversial, things like the Sea Org, for instance, where there's allegations of people who work for Scientology at such low cost, people who are effectively indentured in a very unfair manner to the church in such a disgusting way where when you really look into it, you wonder how the fuck is it even legal in the United States of America? But it turns out a lot of stuff can be legal that shouldn't be in the country. I mean, it's just interesting. You never really see like a intelligence agency for the Catholics or the Muslims or anyone. You just sort of see it for this organization that for this one religion out of California, out of Florida, really. And ultimately, there's a lot of people that are targeted that are actually from free zone organizations. So, in terms of Scientology, where a lot of money is spent on upgrading your OT levels, by spending money on all the forms of religious practices they have to do in regards to the auditing that members have to go through. There's a lot of people that are free zone Scientologists, so people that believe in the Scientology religion. Again, there's a lot of people that this religion helps them out. And there's people that have realized, hey, we shouldn't be a religion that's charging people insane amounts of cash. We should just be doing this stuff for free because that's what we believe in. Now, ultimately, these are individuals that the church obviously doesn't like, because you can imagine that they're taking away the financial gain that the church has with people just giving away stuff for free, right? Now look, a lot of us can probably look at something like Scientology and think, damn, what a fucking crazy good grift, man, to start a religion, bypass things like taxes, and just make a shit ton of cash out of this. In fact, what's also interesting about the Church of Scientology versus other religions that I found was super interesting were things like Operation Snow White, for instance. Now, for anybody that doesn't know what Operation Snow White was, Operation Snow White was basically a criminal conspiracy at the time that alleged that the Church of Scientology during the 70s were actually trying to purge records of Scientology, and specifically L. Ron Hubbard back in the day. So they would apparently infiltrate into like over 130 government agencies, embassies, consulates, you name it, as well as actual private organizations that were critical of the Church of Scientology. And it was one of the largest infiltrations, apparently, of the US government in history, to the point where they had allegedly 5,000 covert agents inside. So Scientology operatives would commit things like infiltration, they would wiretap, they would literally steal in government offices. And guess what government office in particular came out? The US Internal Revenue Service. So, you know how they say never fuck with the IRS? Well, this is a religion that absolutely fucked with the Internal Revenue Service. And it turns out they fucking won somehow, man. That is crazy shit. So you can actually read it, right? The government, the feds, had even agreed to give the tax exemption to the Church of Scientology, which allowed the church to have access to, again, huge things like tax exemption, which is great for your monetary flow. It's great to get the government off your back when it comes to auditing your finances. And of course, ultimately, it took literally decades for the IRS, the US government, and the Scientologists to organize and do everything over here, right? To get this working. And of course, the exemptions were granted as part of this large settlement between the government and organizations that focused on these legal disputes that went back since the foundation of the church. Again, this is articles from the 90s at this point. So officials at the Internal Revenue Service said the decision granting the Scientologist tax-exempt status does not change the standards for determining when an institution is considered religious for tax purposes. Again, it's not really easy, from my understanding, to start a religion and gain tax exemption. Again, anybody, if it was that easy, a lot more people would be starting these quasi-religions, funneling their money through them, and be given tax-exempt status. How Scientology was able to achieve this is rather an interesting story on its own to go down. And to give an idea, going to things like the office, the OSA, when it comes to Scientology, is a term that they like to use called fair game, which means that if you're critical of Scientology, it's basically fair game for them to do anything they want to go after you because you're a threat to their church, you're a threat to their religion, you're a threat to their members. And even though they don't use the term anymore because of the backlash they got starting it, let's not forget that fair game is still something used up to the present day by the Church of Scientology to critics that are actually unable to fight back against their legal mechanisms. That's why I'm very careful about what I say. Again, everything that I've said in this video are just allegations. I have really nothing substantial that I want to say personally about the Church of Scientology. especially considering how litigious they actually are. I think it's important that people start to look deeper into this religion because there are people that I see who kind of, there are people that I've seen in Los Angeles around this religion, especially younger people that seem like they're kind of brought into this fold. And it seems like, at least in my experience, they look as if they're taken advantage of. And that's not something I or really any normal person actually enjoys watching for obvious fucking reasons. So, it's one thing I feel like when it comes to these, when it comes to these Scientology speedruns, yeah, they're funny, goofy videos to look at. But ultimately, the end of the day, the places that they're running into are places that have had an aura of mystique surrounding them, right? Obviously, people were kind of worried about what was going on inside these buildings. Are some of the people that joined the Church of Scientology, are they people that are now indentured to them? These are people that, from what I've heard, from what I've read, some of these young people, they leave their families behind, sometimes travel internationally just to join these religions. And, their family members want them to come back, obviously. But these people are now indoctrinated into this new religion that they have. And they're just completely isolated from the people that they, that they probably still love. I mean, that's how cults kind of work, right? They sort of isolate you to the point that, they don't want you talking to your family, they don't want you talking to your friends, they only want you in their bubble because once you're isolated, you're a lot easier to control. So that's kind of the avenue and route that I've seen sort of thrown into this mix. Now, where the OSA comes in is obviously a lot of these kids are infiltrating a building where this organization operates in. And I feel like I feel like if this trend continues and the more this building gets mapped out, maybe at some point we might be able to see something that the church really doesn't want you to see. It's one of the reasons why, obviously, this is harassment, obviously, this is trespassing, but I'm sure that there's stuff that probably is happening in this building that the church doesn't want you to fucking see. If it's one thing that this kind of reminds me of is back in 2008, and God, dude, what? Time fucking flies. Almost 20 years ago, there was shit like Project Chanology, where a bunch of these 4chaners were just, wearing the Anonymous masks, just sort of showed up outside the Scientology centers. And, basically we're trying to raise awareness and talking about, the evils of the Scientology group. And of course, it's crazy to see 20 years later, we're almost seeing this come back full circle, right? And a lot of this actually happened back in the day when Scientology appeared. There was an allegation that Scientology went out of their way to remove a video featuring Tom Cruise that was pretty fucking embarrassing, because the big allegation at the time was obviously that Scientology had a really big control over the media apparatus, and because of how embedded they were with a bunch of celebrities in Los Angeles, they were able to rapidly spread their influence through them. And of course, obviously, the people who were on the Project Chanology side, they didn't appreciate the fact that Scientology was able to scrub the internet at the time of, things that made them look fucking bad. Now look, ultimately, and ladies and gentlemen, the Scientology trend is a wild place indeed, okay? What started out as a place where people, anybody that didn't have any idea what Scientology was, looking on the internet and thinking, wow, these kids are just raiding this fucking church. And I think the conversation sort of eclipses from just a bunch of kids mapping out the Scientology Center in LA to people finally opening their eyes and looking at what is, in my opinion, a rather controversial cult, right? I'm not somebody to dog anybody's religion. I think that's a pretty shitty thing to do. But when it comes to Scientology, guys, it's no doubt that there is some shady shit that this organization is involved into. And if it's one thing that I think these kids are kind of on the cusp of, is the more they keep rushing in, the more they keep showing, the more likely it is that people will probably find something really shady to come out of Scientology through this. I think the renewed vigor on looking at this cult is actually the more interesting part. Now, I do tend to agree with some of the critics in saying that, listen, I think raiding and harassing and fucking trespassing on their property probably isn't the best look optically, but at the same time, it's one of those things where it's interesting to see the churches so much on edge, considering that they're calling this shit hate crimes, getting the fucking LAPD involved. It has the potential to turn really dangerous, as these internet trends often lead to. But I think if it's one thing to springboard off of, like I said, Scientology. If you actually look into just how they got their tax exempt status, it's a story on its own. When you look into things like the Office of Special Affairs, where again, it's the only religion that I know of that has its own internal CIA operations center. When you look at all the critics that have come out of Scientology, even people that are literally familially related to the people at the top right now, it's an interesting rabbit hole to go down. And there's a lot more that I can talk about with Scientology, but I think this video has gone on long enough. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it, I am out.